You can start.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Racism Evolution History to Hope. This is the third of our 6th series, and we're so happy to have you this evening. Tonight, we're going to be exploring and having a wonderful opportunity to discuss the Asian Pacific Islander and Asian and Pacific Islander cultures. Please, it's going to be very important that we follow the process right now. Please, if you would mute both your audio and your video, please. That way it will allow us not to have any distractions. So please mute everything, your audio and your video. Our presentation will be a little different for those of you who have been with us previously. It's going to be interactive this evening. And what we were asking you to do, if you choose to ask a question or make a comment to our presenters, please raise your hand. We will acknowledge you. Until you are called upon, please remain muted, both audio and video. Good evening again. My name is Kimi Irene Ginn. I am the Director of Vibrant Schools. We are one of the sponsoring agents for this series, along with the League of Women Voters and the local chapter of NAACP. It is our hope that we are going to take you from history to hope as we examine, explore, and experience various cultural perspectives when we talk about the area of racism, inequities, and how each one of these cultural groups have overcome, what they're looking for as far as their future. And we're excited to have you here this evening. But I want to remind you again, it's going to be important that you remain muted, both with your audio and your video. If you'd like to interact with our presenters this evening, please plan to raise your hand. We will acknowledge you as quickly as we can so we can continue the process. We're excited about the series. We've had 2 remarkable forums so far with the indigenous people and the African American cultures. And I know this evening is going to be just as insightful and a great experience for all of us. So if you would please pay attention to our next slide. It's very important that you complete some information in the chat room before we begin. If you would please put your name, your organization, what you like about the Asian American Pacific Islander community or culture. Again, if you would put your name, your organization, what you like about the Asian American or Pacific Islander communities and their culture. Please know that we are going to be doing a summary of all the information that's going to be in the chat room this evening. As you are interacting with our presenters, we will be documenting your comments, your questions, so that we have a rich, intentional summary of this experience tonight. I am excited to introduce 2 dynamic women, one of which I've known for quite some time, Lua Pritchard with the Asia Pacific Center. And I've had the opportunity now to meet Suzanne Pack, which has just been exciting as we've been doing the development of this particular series. Both these wonderful ladies are going to take over the presentation. Please, again, remain muted until you're called upon if you have any question or comments, as these wonderful dynamic women of the representatives of the Asian Pacific Island community and the Asian American community. Ladies, it's on, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much, Kimi, and thank you, Cynthia, at the League of Women Voters for putting this show on tonight for our communities, everyone to participate and learn about all of these great issues. I am Lua Pritchard. I'm the Executive Director of Asia Pacific Culture Center. Our mission is to bridge communities and generations through arts, culture, education, and business. We teach and showcase and represent the 47 nations that make up all of Asia and all of the South Pacific. We, tonight, in relations to our topic tonight for education and equity regarding the Asia Pacific communities, we have a youth program at Asia Pacific Culture Center. And we are inside of 5 school districts in Pierce County. We are in Tacoma School District, Clover Park School District, Franklin-Pierce, Fife, and Bethel. So we We are inside the schools, and we also do activities outside, but we particularly assist the Asia Pacific kids, mostly South Asians, Southeast Asians, and Pacific Islanders, because they are the ones with most difficult time to stay in school, and in terms of language and cultural barriers and so forth. And that's what organizations such as APCC comes in, and to help with our Asia Pacific kids, but not limited to. We also have other populations who are attracted to our cultures, and they join our programs. But we work closely with these school districts, and we're called upon as well to come in, particularly to deal with the cultures and the language. I'm also the chair for the Asia Pacific Island Coalition, which is about almost 30 years old. It's a statewide coalition. We are just a chapter. We're the second largest chapter of 7 chapters throughout the state. We deal with all issues related to Asia Pacific people in terms of their survival and also their well-being, being in the state of Washington. And we work with legislators and leaders in terms of policy making for all issues related to the well-being of our people. So we go to Olympia, work with legislators and the governor. We also work with local jurisdictions leaders and so forth in all relations to our Asia Pacific people. And it's great to be with you tonight. And now to my colleague, Suzanne.
Thank you, Lua. And I'd like to acknowledge, there's so many folks that I see in the meeting today that have been long partners with us, like Greg Tambera from the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department, Brian Locke from the AP Coalition, South Puget Sound, and Diane Narasaki. That's wonderful that you're here with us. I think that's the same Diane Narasaki from ACRS. So thank you for being part of this. And I would just like to say that I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation tonight. I am the Director of Community and Behavioral Health for Korean Women's Association. As many of you may know, KW is actually quite large. We are actually the 41st largest nonprofit organization in Washington State, which is huge. Like we've got like 1,400 employees. Actually, only about half of them, or maybe less than half, are API community members. We have all races and ethnicities and represented in our organization, as well as genders. And we are proud to be in 14 counties and providing many of the essential health services, social services, housing, and etc. I think that there are important moments like this moment in history when we have to all come together and talk about issues that are relevant to the AAPI community. As many of you know, there has been an unprecedented level of hate and violence against the AAPI community right now because of COVID-19 related racism. Many of you know that this is not always new. There has been strains of anti-Asian racism, going back to kind of anything against new immigrants, this kind of fear of China or Asia or etc. So this has long roots in, I think, American history. But I think it's really important that we're gathered here today to talk specifically about equity in education. There's so many different topics we could talk about, but because we only have an hour and a half, Lua and I and Kimmy and Cynthia, we felt it was really important to talk about how the different communities within the AAPI community are experiencing education and access to education. And as many people have mentioned in the chat, AAPI is one of the most diverse coalitions. So we want inputs from all of you throughout tonight and your thoughts on how we could achieve this. Thank you, Lua.
So, Suzanne and I felt that it would be great if we can all discuss these this topic matter altogether and be a family of conversation tonight. So please feel free to raise your hand if you want to say something. We would love that. Okay, we want our session tonight to be very interactive. So what does equity in education mean for you? And when it comes to the AAPI community. So I want to say that Washington State, according to the Census 2020, there are now 874,129 people, AA population in the state of Washington. And in Pierce County alone, there's 41,810 of us. But I want everyone to know, because I know a lot of you don't know, the largest AAPI population in the state of Washington is Chinese. The second is Filipino. The third is India. And the fourth is Vietnamese. Fifth, Korean. And then sixth is Japanese. But I also want you to know that in education, we have been fighting for our data to be disaggregated. Because the reason why we needed to disaggregate it is because in school, there are so many Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese, Korean students who excel so greatly. And then with Southeast Asians, South Asians, and Pacific Islanders were buried in there. Because we often wondered, is someone really realizing that there are a lot of our people, or AAPI people, not graduating? And is someone realizing that there are a lot of us not making it well in school, particularly the ones that just come from the islands or the Asian countries that lack English language right away? And the families are right away in poverty, and the families are right away struggling. And also because we are AAPI people coming from foreign countries, we immediately automatically have fear. We have fear of opening up. We have fear of saying something. We have fear of people looking at us different. And we have fear of just being around. And then the other portion too, there are a lot of us who are here and not with our immediate families. We're here living with uncles and aunties. We could be here living with other families too, who are friends or people who somehow, we have some of those different countries taking care of our people too. So there's a lot of ways to mess up the data. The reason for not graduating from school or not making it or not making good grades. But the equity in that is that those people are forgotten. Our AAPI people who have all those struggles and different complications as a family, as a human being, and trying to make it in America and all that stuff. So our data is often buried inside because always people think the Asians are making it well. Yeah, and so that's why we need to education in Washington State need to really open up and really understand and search. But we have a feeling because of this hard work we've been doing so far, for so many years now, it's just now, coming up as people are now opening up to understanding all that and try to make it through. But for a long, long time, we haven't had that. So I would like to turn it to any one of you to see what you feel about this question. What would you like, if you're AAPI on this call, what would you like people to understand better about our community and when it comes to education? Do we have a hand raised out there, Kimmy, somewhere?
I'm checking now. I'm going down the list. So far, I don't see a hand, but I'm still going through everybody. Please just raise your hand if there's any comments or questions you have at this point. I will acknowledge you and bring you in.
So what we do at APCC as our youth program, dealing with Pierce County, Asia Pacific students who need the help, is that we are inside of the schools. School districts allow us to come in and partner with them. And we have the opportunity to provide after-school tutoring on different subject matters. And then we also help the students do extra activities to get them back to the flow of wanting to be in school. And then there's a lot of social issues as well that typically come with the students. So that's what we try to address it holistically to help the families as well, because a lot of the students who are normally struggling in school is because sometimes there are matters at home that need assistance with it. So we try to serve the student in a holistic manner.
Yeah, Lua, right now you have two people who are interested, Gregory Tambara and then Alice Fong.
Great.
Hello, Lua.
Hi, Greg, how are you?
I'm doing good. So you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. On your comment of disaggregating information, that is so important in the schools, but it's also so important in other places. I think that one of the areas that we struggle with is in public health. Our information is not disaggregated, and it is rolled up into Asians and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. Those are two categories. The Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders is a relatively recent category. So that's the beginning of some disaggregation, but I agree with you that there are two reasons. One is it gives us a better idea as to what is going on in each of those many communities that make up the Asian American Pacific Island category, if you will. But it also sends, I think, a message to the larger population. That includes students when they're young, as well as parents, as well as administrators in the community at large, that AAPI is not just one culture. It is a rich variety of cultures. And, I remember growing up and in Pierce County, and friends of mine would, say to me, well, there is really no difference between Chinese and Japanese. And as a very young person, I did not know what to say, but that was the perception of people when I was growing up. And I think that a lot of that still colors how people interact with the wide variety of communities that make up the Asian and Pacific Island category. So that's common, or the thoughts that I had as you were speaking, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. And then let me just ask Alice, if you still wanted to share.
Yes, I can share.
Okay.
I think it
Alice Fong.
Thank you. Also adds to what Greg shared too. I'm a product of Tacoma Public Schools, and the time that I went, I didn't even know, because I didn't really have the language of, identity. And why I said that I was going to cry is because Diana is actually on the call. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and I was looking for work, and a family friend connected me to Diane and said, hey, maybe you want to talk to her. And I went and I spoke to her, and she helped me see that as a Asian person, and also with, you know, my culture being in America, that, you know, culturally, I was like, kind of like at war with myself, because, you know, there's so many differences. And as I moved back to Pierce County, and I rekindled my relationships with some of my high school friends who are also Asian, there was something magical or something that I just loved about them, but I didn't know what it was. And it was that familiarity. And I think that as adults in the school building, also on top of everything else that they're, you know, helping us through our education, is helping us also to identify that, of who we are, that, and the beauty of it, and helping us navigate. I think being able to navigate and understand that earlier on might have been also helpful in the education world, instead of, again, lumping us all, or just seeing that we're all just, there's, you know, we're all like a blanket of a sea of young people.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Is there anyone else? Kimmy?
Yeah, Jennifer Lopez Silvers just asked a question. Which school districts are you in as far as services?
So we're in Tacoma School District, Clover Park, Franklin Pierce, Bethel, and Fife. One of the greatest things that that we have been fighting for is funding, equal access to funding for our students that we help. And unfortunately, it's been a real struggle. And that's why we've been really fighting for disaggregated of data, because, you know, a lot of times you have to show people that, hey, we really do have a problem. We have a great problem, especially in the Pacific Islanders and Southeast Asians and South Asians. We have Cambodian students, we have Samoan students, Tongan, you know, Marshallese students. There's a lot of Micronesians now immigrated into Washington State. So we have so many of our students, AAPI students, who are failing and who are not making it. And so we need some funding. We need to have OSBI and school district to, because I know school districts get a lot of money, and they're not really opening up and say, hey, you know, let us give you this so you could work out of on those AAPI students. The language, the cultures. There's so much that we need to share with the school districts. We would really like it if training equitable matters to allow us to come in and train the teachers on those cultures that of the students that they deal with, and make them up, because a lot of teachers, they don't know how to deal with our students, especially the one that just came from the countries. They don't know the customs, what they're used to. And so our kids are labeled improperly. And that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not equity in education.
Lou, if I could just make a couple of comments. One of the things I think is going to be important, both the Tacoma Public Schools and the Clover Parks Public Schools have officially passed equity policies. And within those equity policies, it's going to be important for community people to hold districts accountable to identify what does that mean as far as equity. And clearly what you're talking about with the disaggregation of the data as far as unique services that need to be rendered to disenfranchised and marginalized groups, that needs to be part of holding districts accountable with these new equity policies. So I think that's going to be an important part of making sure that districts are providing the resources where they need to be provided. I want to just ask a question that's in the chat room. Question was, when you mentioned a funding category, specifically, was there a category that you had identified with the district, was the question in the chat room?
Yes, funding to help us help the students in your own district. You know, not just to assume that APCC can just come over there and help you, the students of the different districts without the support of the districts themselves, because that will tell us that you care about your students as well. If you just allow APCC, APCC must get funding from somewhere else, but at least do something to show us that you care about those students of your district. So that's something that we're still waiting for from the district side of things. But it's not stopping us, because we need to help our students. We need to help our AAPI students. We're not going to wait for school districts to give us money to be able to do it, but we're very happy and we're very we feel very blessed to be allowed to work and partner with those school districts. But I wish they would go far more than an MOU to be on the grounds with the kids. So
yeah, and I think what I'm hearing you saying is it needs to be institutionalized. It should be part of the budget to work with specific groups that need those additional resources.
Absolutely, and it should come from OSPI, and then the other thing too. So when school districts have are working on some grants, and even OSPI, they call out to the community to express our support and express and share the data from all the work that we are doing with the kids. But
Exactly.
we feel that these kids are part of the whole system and they need to be equitably treated as such.
Right. Let me just interrupt a minute just for process. For those of you just joining the group, it's really going to be important for you to remain muted, both video and audio. If you have a comment or question, please raise your hand. I will acknowledge you so that you can ask your question or make your comment. So if you're just joining us, please mute both your video and audio unless you have comment or question. And all you need to do is put your hand up, and believe me, I will acknowledge you and get you into the conversation. Thank you so much.
So Suzanne, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, sure. But before I speak, how about Karen? I think she had her hand up.
Okay.
Okay, sometimes I have problems with my microphone. Can you hear me? Okay, so I was the one that asked the question about the funding. I was a teacher in the 90s, and so I kind of know budgeting from just being a teacher. I guess my question was, do you know where in the budget it comes from, in the school district budget? Is there, I don't know what a budget looks like anymore.
Yeah.
So you're asking for funds from where?
From any of the school systems that we're dealing with, or OSPI in general. They should have funding to help kids with language problems, with cultural problems, and then for kids who are really failing and they don't know why, and then we come in and we assess all these matters, but a lot of it is language barriers and cultural barriers. Yeah.
Okay, I see that it's a language. Well, I mean, it's obvious, but now I can put it in my mind. So somebody said something about the policies, that the school district voted for a policy.
Equity policies, now they're all dealing with it.
Yeah, let me just say, both the Tacoma Public Schools and the Clover Park Public Schools just recently passed equity policies. And what they're looking at is making sure that in the delivery of services in their particular school district, they will do it with an equity lens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
There's
thank you.
an official policy to make sure that the implementation of services are done equitably.
And then that's how
I hope they reach out to us in our communities and participate in those meetings so that we can voice our feelings about how we should be included in those equitable matters for the school districts.
Yeah, because once it's a policy, then you can ask then
Right.
there's some some push to be able to do that policy. You have to put money in it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, as I'm kind of making my comment, I'll kind of go to the next slide too, because it actually kind of speaks to what Lua and what Greg was saying earlier. And then I'd like to actually call on Francis to speak after I kind of share this slide information. But one of the things from my personal perspective that is really upsetting, as both Greg and Lua have mentioned, is when, like for instance, especially with the Pacific Islander communities and students and the individuals, it just says like there will be an asterisk and there says not enough data. And they'll just say like, you can't even have a disaggregated data because they say there's not enough population size. But that is actually not correct, because I was actually looking at the population of Pacific Islanders in Washington state, and it's been increasing. So it's actually a pretty sizable amount. I mean, I don't know the exact amount, but I think it was like over 30,000 or something like that. And it's going up steadily. So that's actually not an excuse anymore. And I think it's quite, maybe the word offensive is kind of too strong of a word, but when we look at, Greg was talking about not just in education, but health as well. The Pacific Islander community faces tremendous health equity issues. So when there's an asterisk that says, oh, we can't tell, what is the heart disease rate of Pacific Islanders or cancer rates or, things like that, then that means that we can't ask for funding. That means that we can't, we have to push for there to be focus on those areas. I'm so really impressed by what Lua has done with what's happening with COVID-19, the fact that there is now disaggregated data that shows what the COVID-19 rates are for the Pacific Islanders. And I kind of feel like if this had happened, if this pandemic had happened several years ago, maybe that data wouldn't even have been captured, which would have been a travesty and a tragedy. So to me, there are real world consequences to not having disaggregated data. And so this slide shows, the importance of having disaggregated data, right? Because it is, I think, oftentimes very easy. I think there's kind of easy to make two types of assumptions. One assumption is that, like, we talked about earlier, that maybe all of the AAPI community is the same and homogeneous and maybe all doing well. And we all know that that is not true. And two, that because, if you just look at the high level data and the AAPI may be doing well compared to other groups, if you just lump everybody together, that means that when we're having conversations about equity, sometimes the AA community, like Lua had indicated, is not invited to the table to talk about equity related issues or funding for these types of resources, because there is an assumption that that they're being taken care of, that they're going to, pull them up by the bootstraps or something's going to happen without there actually being assistance provided. This data shows the percent of students from each of the AAPI communities who are enrolled in bilingual education. So that's just one of the metrics, right? But here you can see, for example, Micronesian students, many of them, majority of them are having bilingual education. Vietnamese, Cambodian, Hmong, Laotian, each of these groups are over a quarter of the students are enrolled in bilingual education. So again, just with that one resource alone, we can see that not all AAPI community is the same. And this trend is true when we look at socioeconomic conditions as well. And it's very important to note, and we're going to have a conversation about this in just a minute, but it's very important to note that when there are differences in educational needs or educational outcomes or socioeconomic outcomes, it's actually not a reflection of that country. It's not a reflection of that community so much as it is a function of the immigration policy. And so, if you've got a country where there are many refugees coming because there was a war, that's different than, maybe in the 80s, there was a policy that said, oh, we're going to let people who are skilled laborers or doctors or nurses immigrate. So that's a function of the policy as opposed to what is endemic to that country. So I think that, there are many things that we have to take into account, and disaggregated data helps us be able to make requests that really kind of provide the resources to the communities that need them.
All right. Before you go on, Suzanne,
Yes,
before you go on to another slide, we've got a hand up. Francis Blair, you have a question?
actually a statement. Just today, I received from Twana Nobles, my 28th LD senator, an invitation to a public listening session on the Clover. I assume it's the Clover Park equity thing. If I get Lewis email, I would be glad to forward that to you.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Francis.
I love that. Thank you, Francis. We're just problem solving right here on the spot. So another measure that this report, and this is a great report, unfortunately, this is a 2015 report. I wish there was a more recent one, but I couldn't find it. But I think that the trends are still true. I don't think a ton has changed in the past 6 years. So I think that this data, which is from Washington State, still holds true. And it's that college level education is also not attained at the same levels if we look at different communities. There's also kind of the myth of model minority where people think, well, if you're from the AAPI community, you must automatically all be graduating from high school and all be going on to college. And that is not true. And so I know that there was a prolonged effort many years in the making that Lua, Diane, many people of the AP Coalition was involved in, just to be able to get a part-time student navigator for the Southeast Asian community at UW. I mean, I know that happened like several years ago, but it took like years, right, to like advocate for just one part-time navigator for the Southeast Asian community. And I think that that kind of speaks to, and if you think about UW and how many AAPI students they have, that's kind of surprising, right? But again, I think this stems from this belief that even though many of these students may need specialized resources, or they may have English barriers, or they may have socioeconomic needs, many of them are living in poverty, and yet this myth still persists that they must be doing okay, so that it becomes hard to even ask for a part-time resource. Or what happens, I think, with the case of APCC is that everybody just calls Lua and says, can you help out with this or that? And I think it's always positioned as, oh, we need a translator, right? When in fact, the APCC staff end up doing much more than just translation. They're navigating the system, but there isn't the sense that there needs to be resources to accompany that request. So I think that these types of data just tells us that we can't look at the AAPI as a singular entity. We have the data. In some cases, we need more, but I think that with that data also comes a responsibility that when we're having equity conversations, that we provide that culturally responsive care. And I think that this is my question to the group, and I would love for people to put your comments in the chat or to raise your hand so that Kimmy can call on you. I alluded to the fact that I believe, and I think many people believe, that the differences that you're seeing within the AAPI groups is largely a part of the history of US immigration policy. Sometimes, like as you see here, many of us are familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Where before that, they were allowing immigrants from China and other Asian countries, as well as Pacific Islander countries, to come because they needed labor, in Hawaii, in the West, etc. And then there was this very xenophobic, anti-immigrant sentiment because there was this irrational fear that the Asians were going to take people's jobs away. So then they passed this very racist law to just only focus on Chinese and Asians, to exclude them from immigration. And it was enforced in many cases very violently, by mob rule in places like Tacoma and Bellingham and places like that. So there is that very rough history that happened not too many years ago. I mean, if we think about it, this is what happened, 100 years ago, less than 100 years ago. And so the types of immigration patterns that we're talking about largely happened after 1968, after the Civil Rights Act was passed and after the US immigration law was reformed. But I think that means that there are differences depending on which wave of immigration your ancestors or you came in, depending on what immigration law was in place that kind of led to your family coming to United States. It could have very drastically different consequences for your family in terms of what resources are available for you, or what kinds of equitable access that you might expect. And now I'd like to turn it over to everybody in the group to share your thoughts in terms of how you think just history of the United States in general might have just shaped the inequities and the differences that we're seeing within the AAPI community.
So I'll be monitoring, looking for hands. If there's anyone who'd like to make a comment, ask a question, please raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you. Lynn Crowley, please.
Hi, Lynn.
Unmute, Lynn, unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, everyone. And
evening.
so nice to see all of you here. I really feel very, very touched by having the opportunity to talk about this issue, because right now there's a great opportunity for us to really include API histories in our school curriculum. And the EPIC that I am with, which I'm located here in Olympia, South Puget Sound chapter is the area, really is trying to go ahead and start a movement for us to really move the legislators and everyone to look at how we will be able to do that. Because the education equity issue is not just on education, it's on people's perception about where APIs are regionally from. And as all of you have already shared, we are all coming in different time and for different reasons. Even though some of those are for economic reason, like what Suzanne just said, but some others are maybe not having anything to do with economics. Like myself, I came because I got married. So, you know, there are some different kind of reasons that different people come. But a lot of times, all of this kind of histories, informations are not being shared and taught in the school. So what we learned is that most of the people don't know about the APIs around them, and they don't know how to ask questions about them. And therefore, we are going to continuously having to deal with this dilemma of foreigners' perceptions, no matter how long you have been in this country. I know for sure, because I'm a teacher. I work with students, and teaching in a college helped me really realize that so many people just don't know, don't know. And they gone through K through 12 into the college, they just don't know a lot of the history's information. So what I'm hoping we will be able to do is seize the moment and really use this opportunity for us to help everyone to see that we do need to have a richer, more diverse, you know, education curriculums included for K through 12 to share with the students, and definitely have more opportunity for college students to get ethnic studies so they can learn more if they like to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? I don't see a hand or in the chat.
Yeah, so I'm kind of looking at the chat, and I think there was a question from
Yeah.
Louis.
About
Yeah,
the
like,
data.
yes, like why can't we get more current data than 2013? That's a really great question. And in fact, that kind of goes to the resource allocation, right? That the funding that Lua and Greg were talking about. In some states, I would say California is actually the best when it comes to disaggregated data, whether it's education or health or whatever. California consistently records data at a disaggregated level. So they can produce reports every year at a disaggregated level. In Washington State, unfortunately, even though I think Washington State ranks in the top 5 in terms of the AAPI portion of the population in the entire country, even though Washington State is very diverse like that, the data is not consistently captured and reported at a disaggregated data level, which means that a report like that, it takes a tremendous amount of time and resource for a person or a group Usually it's the Washington State Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs that would kind of commission a research like that. But it takes a lot of effort to put that together because there isn't funding to do that on a regular basis. I wish there was. I wish it was as like, because there are like annual reports that the OSPI produces every year, right? Where they show graduation rates and college rates and all kinds of rates. And when you look at those annual reports, I think that Asian Americans are separated from Pacific Islanders, but the Asian Americans is never broken out. It's always just Asian Americans. And then when it comes to Pacific Islanders, sometimes there's enough data, but sometimes there's like an asterisk. So, it's just unfortunately that level of commitment to the disaggregated data is not there yet.
Most definitely. And we cannot just assume, and we can't lump us together. So people have to understand, and this goes for policymakers, especially for policymakers. They need to really request and require the right amount of data, the equitable amount of data and information for specific populations who are really struggling in the community. And so, and that's why policymakers should also be equitable.
Yeah.
We need to really vote people in who can have different voices in to manage the flow of services within communities. So we can't just be all white in a school board, for example. We can't be all black or all, you have to be mixed so that because America is a mix. And so Washington State, we're so diverse. We have to, look like the policymakers. Demographics need to look like the mix of communities that they're serving and they're making policies for.
Yeah. Excellent point, Lua. Excellent point, indeed.
And we need to demand it. As a people, we need to demand that. And we need to wake up and look at what's really going on and see and what we need to fix so that we can be served equitably.
Yep. And I think what Kamaya was writing on chat is very similar to what Lua was saying, which is, yes, I mean, unless we can actually have that disaggregated data, policies may exist on paper, but things don't really change, right? So we need to have that data to be able to provide that personalized service. And I find it amazing that in 2021, these tech companies like Facebook and Amazon are providing individual level service because they can capture data on millions and hundreds of millions of people at an individual level, but we can't be able to share data at a country level, right? So it's kind of like we know that we can do it from a technology perspective. It just requires the willpower. And I think Carol, what you're sharing with the immigration policies being shaped all the way from the 1600s, absolutely. And that the white religious leaders who were fleeing persecution were still kind of, instituting very white supremacist kinds of policies, either knowingly or unknowingly. So, yeah.
What they were running from, they brought here and continued.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think we are still living in that era, to a certain extent, maybe at a subconscious level. I think we all strive to think in equitable terms, but I think there is still this kind of entrenchment of white supremacy that says, I read a news article recently about how there was a report, I can't remember by which group in Washington State, they basically were lumping Asian Americans and the whites together in an education related report because they said, well, when you look at all the Asian Americans, then their education outcomes are the same as white people. So we're going to just lump them together. And that is problematic on so many levels, right? It's basically sending the message that by definition, if you're not doing well, then you must be a person of color. So, and we know that's not true, but that's what they were saying, right? So if you're doing well, then you must be white, which was a terrible thing to say. And B, they are completely ignoring the differences that exist within the Asian American communities. And, they're basically kind of erasing the identity of Asian Americans and only looking at Asian Americans, in relation to the other groups, right? Like, are Asian Americans communities of color or are they white? As opposed to like, we have our own culture, we have our own history and our own background. So it was problematic in many different ways, but that kind of story headline is happening in 2021. I mean, I think that's like, that article is like 1 month old. So I think that's what we're facing right now.
Yeah. And that's what we're about with these forums, is the overall impact of racism and white supremacy. It's alive and well.
Very much alive and well.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at both the chat room and looking for hands. Any other comments or questions as we continue? Okay.
And
I mean, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I just want to call out to, I don't know if she's still on the line, but I can't see her and I want to see her, is my sister, Diane Narasaki. Diane, are you still there?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh, well, she's here. There she is.
Hi, sister. How are you?
I'm fine, Lua, and thank you to you and all the speakers today for a really great forum.
Yeah, you want to add something to what's being discussed here?
No need, so many great insights already being shared, and thanks to the organizers for pulling it together.
Diane, I'm glad to have you this evening. Thank you for participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, we have one more slide to have a conversation on, but before we get to that, I just wanted to invite anybody on the call to just share your ideas about anything related to education, whether or not we talked about it specifically or not, or if you have ideas about how we can change this, how we can advocate, or maybe you actually have a different opinion. Maybe you're like, okay, there are other communities besides the AAPI community that also need help. That's a very valid viewpoint as well. And you can share that too. Any types of thoughts you have are welcome here.
So Suzanne, there's a question from Carol. It says, is Asian Pacific Culture Center training lobbyists to visit legislation or to visit legislators to Olympia in person or Zoom to make legislators aware of the need for specific funding for all different cultures in our state? Yes, Carol, we are definitely talking to so many of them, if not all of them, all the time. And it's a continuous work. It's a work forever. Yes.
Yeah.
Every chance we get, we do it.
And I have to say that we're very blessed that both Lua and Brian here are masters of organizing, as of course is Diane. So as the API coalition co-chairs, Lua and Brian are constantly leading legislative efforts, and with Lynn Crowley as well, where there are opportunities to meet with state legislators, with congressional leaders. They're involved in redistricting recommendations as well. So there are opportunities to speak directly to the legislators. I think that, it's also really important for us to have this conversation amongst ourselves, because I think that it's very important for us to realize, A, maybe we haven't thought about this issue because there's many other things in our lives. And B, maybe we thought about this personally, but we thought like, I don't know how to get involved, or maybe just me that feels this way. So I think from that perspective, I mean, if you want to be involved, there's actually a page that we share where you can reach out directly to Lua and to Brian to get involved with the API coalition and to actually start speaking to the legislators about this. But I think that it'd be really good to just hear your thoughts right now on what are other types of things we can try, what are other types of policy solutions that we can explore.
Yeah, let me just, I'd like to make a comment about that. Based on what we do with Vibrant Schools, one of the things that we're getting ready to launch is something called the Youth Activism Academy, because I think it's important for students to speak up for what's happening in the schools. It has a great impact for a student to be at that mic at school board meetings to say, hey, this is what's happening in my school. This is where we need to see the change. And it's so impactful to have it come directly from the young people. And so we're going to be launching that, and I'm looking forward to the participation from participants here, that we work with the youth. And I don't know about the rest of you, I turned 70 this year, and it's time for me to start getting that next generation ready. We've got to get our youth involved and be more active in the policies that are happening, because they're the ones that are impacted the most. They're the ones that are in the schools. And so that's going to be important. And I think that's one of our strongest strategies right now, is getting our youth more involved.
That is so great. Thank you, Kimmy. And I'll be sure our youth program connects up to you to help with that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Lua. Appreciate the support.
And I think that Lucinda has her hand up.
Yes, I'm long retired from teaching in the public schools and from working in Tacoma Community House back in the 80s, where I first ran across Lua. But one of the issues that I haven't heard raised is that when kids enter the school and become acculturated, have friends from other communities, they change. And there is a gap between what they can express to their parents or their guardians so there is a culture clash between the younger generation and the older generation. And that is another source of disruption in a child's life.
Absolutely. Those
Thank
are
you,
all,
Lucinda.
yes.
Thank you for that.
Those are all influences that happen. And those are a lot of those are what we deal with on a daily manner with our youth group as well, because it becomes a difficult moment too for the caregivers or the guardians or the parents, and because there's a lot of traditions that sometimes according to parents shouldn't be broken. And so those are issues are related to what we deal with on a daily manner for our youth program. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Lucinda. Nice to see you.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I just want to thank Marika for the comments that you're sharing about kind of the fact that we can introduce more cultures, in schools and events. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And then I am going to put, actually, Lynn or Brian, if you guys can put the website of the APIC SPS in the chat. I'm going to also share that in the PowerPoint, but I think that would be really helpful. So I want to turn this over to Lua now. Lua, you're muted. You're muted.
Lua, unmute. Thank you.
So the resources that are available, there are so many. There are over 200 organizations that are AAPI oriented and owned and spearheaded, managed. That's throughout the state. But we all have different purposes. But a few that I can name real quick is APCC, of course, where I am, Korean Women's Association, where Suzanne is. There are Asia Pacific Island coalitions in Pierce County, South Puget Sound, where Brian and Lynn Crowley are, in Snohomish County and King County, in Yakima Valley and Spokane. But we typically also still work with Kitsap, even though it's not developed to be an API coalition yet, but we still work. But even if there are no APICs in in other areas, we try to cover all 6 of our chapters. We try to cover everyone and anyone who comes up with a need for Asia Pacific people. And then we have in King County, that we normally deal with is Asian Counseling Referral Services. And then in Snohomish County is no immigrants and refugees of the Northwest. So those are all on this side, the west side of the mountain, and on east sides of, that we have APICs over there too. But no matter what, there are many resources available. And if you just reach one of us, we'll get you to others. And we try to use geographically. For example, if there's an issue in Linwood, then we try to have our APIC in Linwood spearhead that effort of mobilizing the community and getting the leaders together to address the issue and so forth and so forth. But statewide, we always come together if it's a real a serious matter that we need to, like what Suzanne talked about when we had to go to University of Washington in Seattle to advocate for a position to help our AAPI students there. So many issues come across us, and we do that. And on an annual basis, we go to Olympia, and we typically go either January or February. When we go big, we go maybe close to 3,000 or more than 3,000. And historically, we've started this whole effort in 1996. So we actually have a meeting with the governor, and we meet with all the legislators, and especially the leadership of legislators. So we do this every year, and we meet throughout the year. It takes us a whole year to come together and figure out what issues are best related to our people, for the well-being of our people and the good health of our people, so that we can go to Olympia and advocate for policy making or changing something that is not right, and so forth. So I wish for government people to reach out to us. I wish for school districts to do that, so that we can work together, and for the sake of our Asia Pacific students that are typically, there's a lot of them who are struggling. For example, my case, our caseload at APCC for Asia Pacific students who we're working with, it's like between 120 to 160 kids. I mean, those are kids who are not doing well in school, and we need to go help, on a daily manner. So many of them, in all different age groups, and all different levels, grade levels. So, but we are here, and we know where we are because we help each other, we refer to each other, and we try to utilize our great talents to help our people.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of just, as we're kind of wrapping things up and kind of turning this back to Kimmy, I wanted to address Emmy's question, because I think this is actually really important. I'll stop sharing. So Emmy was asking a question about, Asian Americans of mixed heritage and how are they included in this? And I think that is a really important question. I don't have an answer. I think that, I love to invite participants to share your thoughts. I think that we within the AAPI community need to do a better job of inclusion and representation within our community. I mean, one of the things that I'm actually really proud of with KWA is that the people who founded Korean Women's Association, they weren't just Korean women. Many of them are like Korean women who married internationally. So they were kind of representing multiple cultural identity. So that was kind of revolutionary within the Korean American culture, right? Because up until that point, the Korean American women who had married non-Asians were kind of invisible, and their children were kind of invisible. So, I think that there's much more that can be done to advocate for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders of mixed heritage, those who are foster children, there's many kind of, I think, communities within the AAPI community that may feel like, or maybe they come from a country that is not often talked about within the AAPI community because our country is smaller or something like that. I think we can do a better job of being more representative within the AAPI community.
Okay,
I don't know if
anyone want
anybody have
any
yeah, go
comments
ahead.
on that? Looking for some hands or in the chat? Great. All right. Oh, I heard someone say something. Someone get ready. Yeah, I don't see a hand. Is there someone that wanted to speak? Marika, I see you that you're unmuted. Was there something you wanted to say? Marika?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, what was the question? I missed it. I was carrying laundry down the stairs. I'm sorry.
Multitasking. No, I just saw that you were unmuted, so I didn't know if that meant you was something you wanted to say.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Just wanted to be respectful. Thank you. All right, any other comments or questions? Okay, well, I feel like we have had a spirited, intentional dialogue, conversation, questions, comments. I feel the passion. I feel the intensity. I think this was what is so exciting about what we were hoping to do, the League of Women Voters, Vibrant Schools, NAACP. We wanted to have the opportunity for cultural groups to speak their truth. And let me tell you, these two ladies have spoken their truth this evening, as well as the comments and questions that have come from our participants. Want to remind you that these forums are going to be continuing. Our next one is going to be on the Latinx Hispanic community. And I was just looking up when that's going to be. The next one is October the 20th, same time, 7 o'clock to approximately 8:30. We encourage you to come back for the rest of the series. Please tell your friends, neighbors, colleagues, etc. This is an opportunity to clearly hear how racism has historically impacted people of color, those of our indigenous people that were here first, how clearly they've been impacted by racism in this country. But please know that at our last workshop is what can we do that can move strategies, that can change policies, that can make the difference, because we don't want to leave us in this state of distress and uncomfortableness and dealing with problems. We've got to come to the solutions, and they've got to be institutionalized and seriously deliberate kinds of solutions that can last stand the test of time, so that we're not coming back and revisiting this over and over again. So we have an opportunity to do this, and it's going to be from people like all of you that are here tonight. Each one of you as an individual can make a difference. And I want to put that out. Every one of you have an opportunity to make a difference. If it's nothing more than just being, we at Vibrant Schools, we see one of the greatest strengths is being there regularly at school board meetings. You know, it really is uncomfortable for me sometimes to be the only person of color sitting at a school board meeting. People of color, those that are disenfranchised, marginalized, need to be where the policies are being made. And when they see you in the audience, it's hard to make a decision when you're looking at the people that it's going to impact them negatively. So it's important to show up, be there. And so I encourage you, if you haven't been going to school board meetings, please start. And if nothing more, we're not asking you to speak, but be there in the audience. It makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So again, we're going to continue with the forums. The next one, again, is October the 20th, the Latinx Hispanic. Following that is the new immigrants. And then finally, our last one on November 17th, we'll be looking at what are the strategies. I encourage you to continue this process, this journey with Vibrant Schools, League of Women Voters, and the NAACP, because collectively we can make that difference. And so I just can't thank Suzanne and Lua for I knew you all would be fantastic. I mean, I knew that was going to happen. So
Kimmy, before we close this out, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Based on the other forums that you've helped facilitate, is there a theme that you're seeing from the other communities as well, kind of a commonality in terms of needs?
Yeah, basically, I think some of there are some common threads. And I think part of it is looking at the misconceptions of who people of color are, what our needs are, why we feel we need to have equity in the delivery of all services, government services, educational services, economically, health. I was glad that Gravy Tamara talked about the health issues. I mean, COVID-19 clearly showed the health disparities in this country. I mean, it took a pandemic. I mean, come on, this has been going on for years. But now we got a pandemic that clearly that started desegregating information right away. But it shouldn't take a negative situation like that to get the positive impacts that are consistently maintained for the betterment. And I'm always concerned about short-term versus long-term. And so I always want to say we got to look at where to use systemically institutionalized practices that are going to go the distance.
And shouldn't take so many years to fix it.
No, it shouldn't. And you know, the thing is, it isn't rocket science. I mean, that's the part that really gets me. It isn't rocket science. I mean, if you just look at a clear respect for humanity, I mean, come on. I don't know. But, you know, unfortunately, that word of white supremacy, and you know, after coming out of our last government situation with the president and how the whole tone of this nation has changed, I remain hopeful though that pendulum's got to swing back to some sense that we are acting like we've got, you know, good common sense and respect, and that we're making the differences so people are living the quality of life that this Constitution says we're all supposed to have as citizens in this country. And so maybe I'm a Pollyanna and I'm too optimistic, but I think it can be done. And I think it can be done in a collaborative, you know, collaborations, coalitions, all those kinds of things that unite people. So I'm looking at please, I'm getting some words from Cynthia right now from the League of River Willows. Please, any other comments, please put that in the chat room. We are going to be summarizing and making sure that all that is said and shared is going to be documented. So for those of you who chose not to speak up and speak out, but would like to write your comments or questions in the chat room, I invite you to do that now. We value your voice. So please don't hesitate to not make sure that you're included. So.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you, Kimmy and Cynthia, for allowing Lua and I to have this conversation with this group. I agree with everything you said, and I do really believe that only coalitions, multicultural coalitions, will be able to make this happen, because I think that too often, you know, we get caught up in this thing of we got to advocate for one community at the expense of another. And I think we have to be willing to hear about the needs of different communities. I, as an Asian American, should be open to hearing about what's happening with the other communities. And I think only then will we be able to really advocate for, you know, equity at a broader sense of the word. So I appreciate forums like this that really allows us to participate in different communities and hear what's going on.
Yeah. And equity doesn't mean that white people are left out. I mean, I don't know where this word equity meant. It's only for people of color. You know, white folks need equity too. I mean, it's like, what is it all of a sudden? You know, we went into the CRT and all this, like, where did all that come from all of a sudden? So equity is for everybody. It's making sure that those folks who have the greatest need get the greatest resources, and those who don't need as much, you don't need as much. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, it's just do the math.
And be okay about it.
Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah, just be happy that folks are getting what they need so that they can be whole, that they're flourishing. And that whole thing on desegregation is clearly one of the strategies. We've got to show that there are folks, you know, I remember when I ran for school board in Clover Park, and one of the things that came out of some of the candidate forums was what my opponent kept talking about. Well, we got an 89% graduation rate. But then when I said, well, explain to me how you have an 89% graduation rate when I show you here 28% of the Black males aren't proficient in math. So you're graduating people that aren't proficient? Does that make sense? So, I mean, all of that is important when we talk about data. How does that impact clearly the success of students in our educational system, clearly the distribution of health services, clearly in government. I mean, every aspect, when you start looking at who was being left behind, it clearly shows where the inequities are.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other comments? All right, please join us again for all of the forums. We'd love to have you. Thank you for being here. And again, let's all clap for Suzanne and Lua. Great job, ladies. Oh,
Thank
super,
you,
super,
everyone,
super.
for joining
And
us
let's
tonight.
thank Cynthia. Cynthia's behind the scenes. Cynthia's been doing all of the technology.